Welcome to Kabir's Tech Dive podcast. I'm Kabir. Today, I'm honored to introduce you to our first founder interview, Brittany Greenfield, the founder of CEO of Wabbi. Brittany, thank you for joining and thank you for doing this with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I know that you went to Duke, you went to MIT. That's super impressive. And so tell us about you.
Well, thank you. I'm a big, for the basketball fans, I'm a big Duke basketball fan, of course. And, I've always been a little bit of a path less taken kind of person. When I was at Duke, I actually designed my own degree in a unique program that we have that allowed me to combine cross-disciplinary functions to look actually at how technology drove innovation in industry. So I guess you could say it's no surprise that I ended up becoming a founder. And then by the time I was at MIT Sloan, I built my career around identifying market opportunities and building the teams and strategies and herding the cats to go capture whatever that next big thing was. As one of our investors once said to me, Brittany, of course you became a founder. That's what that's what you've been doing for big companies. It was time for you to go do it yourself. And something that I do also like to point out is the fact that I also don't write code, which I think I learned early in my career that just because I could finger paint didn't mean that I was an artist. And so while I'm a technical person, I realized that you could have a great technology career outside of writing code. And that's really where I've sort of blended the two sides of strategy, but also understanding how things are built to go capture new markets.
That's awesome. Writing code is probably becoming a lot less important now with the advent of AI.
I think that's the thing people forget. When you are a founder, you get further and further away from the thing that actually got you to found the company.
So why cybersecurity and why do you choose this mission?
Yeah, so I've always been in enterprise tech, but I was actually started in the ERP space, both with startups, large companies, went through some acquisitions. And when I was working in the networking space at Cisco, I got really close to the cyber team, right? You can't talk about IoT and networks without talking about cyber. And I realized that we'll never be able to realize the full potential of the technology we're creating if we can't secure it. And on top of it, cybersecurity always has to be one step ahead as a result. So in addition to, helping us realize the full value of our digital economy and lives, it's also like, okay, it's a place of intellectual curiosity and where are we going next? And you have to be willing to put some bets out there and be just a little bit ahead of the curve. So it's always a new problem that you're solving.
Awesome. I come from a Linux background. Second year college, I found Linux and been using Linux and actually wrote books about Linux. And I was fortunate to write Red Hat's official book on security. And that was amazing. With that background, I have a theory of security and I want to kind of jive with you, see how you look at it. When somebody says secure something, secure my home. When somebody is like, how can I secure my home? I say, well, lose the windows, lose the door. So if you lose all the windows and the door, you have the most secure home, but is it useful? So I see security as a trade-off because if you have security, lots of things have to go through the checks and balances first before we, for example, user input. You can't take user input directly and not check what's coming to you. So define cybersecurity for us.
Yeah, so you've hit the nail on the head. I say the same thing, right? Like just because you lock up your kid doesn't mean that the kid's going to be safe from everything. And I think for so long, cybersecurity lived in that world of taller walls and deeper moats and, better sharks with laser beams that we weren't making those trade-offs. And as we both know, it's not if you get breached, it's when you get breached. So we look at it as a foundational component. In fact, we call it risk management by design, which is exactly what you described as that trade-off between performance and convenience and usability. There are many risks that a business manages. Cyber is just one of them. Revenue, employee retention, customer delivery. Right. And to me, cyber, and this is the world we play in the broader sense of application security, is about saying, where am I willing to take a risk and okay, go ahead and put a door on this room. Maybe I'm even willing to put a window on this room. But what mitigating controls do I have? Do I have the right kind of lock on it? You wouldn't put a bathroom lock on your front door because somebody could pop that open with a pin, right? Flip side is you might not need a commercial grade lock on your home front door either, right? And so that's how you satisfy that system of checks and balances. And that's the world of application security, which I would say is all cybersecurity, because if you want somebody to configure a firewall, who do you have to tell? The developer. Right. Is how do you process that and then have the mitigating controls to balance the risk with all of the company's other priorities and objectives.
So that's amazing. One of the coolest concepts I came up with is a 45-minute server.
Yeah.
A 45-minute server is a server that disappears after 45 minutes. So imagine a service behind this is a bunch of servers, right? And each server has 45 minutes to leave and they die. We kill them. I'm assuming the bad guy is smarter than me. There's always smarter person out there. So I'm assuming that you will find a way to break. If somebody is laser focused on attacking me, they will find a way.
Right, exactly.
But if it is just like phishing and those script kiddies so-called, and so what they do is they're installing payloads and they're waiting for, waking up. They're probably in a sleep and waking up and then finding that, we hit some fish there. And now they're going to get in and do some damage. But what I do is I kill the server every 45 minutes. Right. And so your payload died with it. Right. And before that, we see a signature difference of the server and say, oh, wow, there's something happened here that is not normal.
Correct. So it's an anomaly.
Strategy has been a core strategy in making, 22 years of business work and, and giving and sleeping at night.
Exactly. And like I said, those are the kinds of risk mitigating things you can do. And right, you didn't lock the server up. Rather, you said, like, if the guy's going to want to get the server, he's going to get the server. But what can I do to fool him a bit, right? And because that also means that you're not constantly, right? If you do lock the server up to prevent the person from ever accessing it, then you're probably going to create some slowness in your own business operations as well every time somebody has to access that. So that anomaly detection and focus on saying how can we minimize the chance for somebody to come in, that's exactly the world of security that we live in and we believe in today. To say, okay, did you put it on the 45-minute server, right? Don't just try to lock it up.
Yeah, I try to do it faster, but the cloud providers don't like provisioning so many.
No, I was going to say.
They hate it. At one point, one of the cloud providers who got bought out by Akamai, they actually blocked us because we're forking so many servers. You're doing it too.
Exactly. And that's the balance. You can't do it faster. And that's a different risk. You don't want to get blocked by Akamai.
So now let's talk about your business, the company. Tell us what Wabbi is and what problem does it solve?
Yeah, so, everybody is familiar with the term DevOps, right? Which, as you go back to that house analogy, DevOps brought the automation to be able to say, hey, is this a house and does it have a room with 4 walls and a door and a window? Great, it's a room. It has a closet, therefore I can call it a bedroom too, etc. And what happened in the DevOps transition was that security got left behind because its processes are very different, right? If we think about development's saying, what can I get out today that's good enough? And security, to your point, is always saying, okay, how can I stop everything? It's very gray versus black and white. And so as a result, security got left behind in this transformation, and they're also outnumbered with 100 developers for every 1 application security manager. And so this became known as DevSecOps. How do we get security integrated into development processes so it can keep up? But it's not just about speed. It's about actually bridging the gap between security and development, or even sometimes translating between security and development. As you know, the hardest thing to do is change human behavior. And what we have said is, don't change human behavior. Development has its processes. It wants autonomy to make educated decisions risk-based educated decisions so it can keep moving forward to meet its goals without having a bottleneck of security. And security just wants to know that the things that they set out were done. And more importantly, if they weren't done, and then the right risk mitigating step was taken. And potentially it could be a block or just recording the fact that it wasn't done. And, I think people are also familiar with the concept of the software development lifecycle. And what we do is manage the application security development lifecycle as part of that. And that's what our platform does. It lets both parties keep doing their jobs with automation, without having to change it just to be able to integrate security in it. So you reduce the risk of bottlenecks, project delivery delays, even in some cases employee turnover because they were doing a lot of manual work. So that way you don't just get, is this a room? You know that it's a safe room because the wiring was checked before the drywall went up and the right lock is on the door.
Anybody else doing what you're doing? Or
no, the space is getting right. People have been trying to tackle this DevSecOps problem because it started creating a mountain of work as DevOps transformations finished and the band-aided approaches fell apart very quickly. We saw early in the DevSecOps movement this concept of shift left, which pushed the bottleneck to a different place. We suddenly were asking developers to own security, and that's not right either, right? That just meant that developers could run a security test on demand, and then it left security without any context about what was going on. And so we are the only platform on the market that's brokering this relationship to say, here's what matters in this situation. And right, so that's like 5% of vulnerabilities or potentially ignored policies, whatnot. 15% of it can be fixed later, and then we're just going to monitor the 80% so that if something changes about the other 80% that we don't care about, then we can go ahead and flag it for being fixed or as a potential blocker. But you've seen different companies tackle individual pieces of the problem, but there's a reason that when we think about CI/CDs, we envision it as this infinity loop. You can't just have a point solution. It's constantly going. You need to dynamically manage it and be constantly reactive.
Absolutely. So in one of the interviews that you've done, I've heard you or the host mention that the cybersecurity is an $8 trillion
yes.
Business, quote unquote. Is it still that, or is it worse?
It is. So just to put things in perspective, if cybercrime was its own country, we could have a separate debate about it being its own country, it would be the world's third largest GDP. And people forget, right? You said it before. If somebody really wants to get me, they're going to be laser focused on getting me. And there are people that show up to jobs in remote centers just like we do, and their job is to get in, right? Their job is to exploit a brand new vulnerability and focus just on where that could be. And it's only going to continue to grow, right? The more technology we have, the more innovations we have, the more the concern of cybercrime is going to grow. And it's across the board, right? It's not just, I was talking to a colleague in a different company the other day, right? We used to think about ransomware being your grandmother's problem. Don't click on that link, grandma. I was reading about a state, I think Columbus, Ohio, has been fighting a ransomware attack for like 45 days, right? It is everybody's problem. And just because it's old doesn't mean that it's not still relevant. So again, if we don't have the right hygiene in place to avoid these things from happening, then it's only going to continue to grow, and it's not going anywhere, because unless we all suddenly go off grid and start making pottery in a shed in the woods.
So talking about ransomware, I recently read somewhere that there's a movement towards removing the ransom insurance for the companies, or making it difficult, or making the company comply with something so that the companies don't just, as soon as they are attacked, they're like, oh, just write it off because we're going to get insurance. What do you think about that space? Like, is insurance the right response to ransomware or not?
It's, I think, again, I go to hygiene on it. I've heard similar things, and I'm not going to profess to be an expert on this. This is just my sort of personal opinion. And companies have struggled with cyber insurance for a long time, right? Because if you think about the nature of insurance, it relies on large data sets and predictability. And for anybody that's taken stats, you can't model something outside of the data set, and cyber is constantly changing. So you could sort of argue it's constantly out of the data set. I think, again, this goes to the risk management. The decision to, we saw this with the United Healthcare breach, the decision to, that they had to pay was saying, hey, the cost to the business and the cost to our ecosystem is greater than the cost of the ransomware, and we'd much rather pay and then deal with it later. I do think you're going to see, and it's not a bad place. I think insurance can provide no different than no different than our healthcare insurance incentivizing us for having our gym membership or whatnot. I do think insurance can provide good structures, especially when you're looking at smaller businesses that may only be having their first foray into cybersecurity. So they can help provide those rubrics and frameworks for people to think about. But yeah, right. Like this is not a new problem, and we're still figuring out how to answer it. And nobody really knows. There's not a perfect answer to it. I think, again, it's about how you decide to manage risk in your business. And, sometimes you pay the ransomware because that's the lesser of the risk that you're taking on.
Thank you. Who is the target customer of Wabbi? Is it the enterprise with in-house dev, or is it software companies? Who is your target?
Look, every company is a software company nowadays, right? And so we deal with large mid-market to Fortune 500 enterprises and DoD. And it's not that everybody shouldn't be doing application security, but our particular approach deals with the nuance very well. The larger the company gets, it may not just be in-house dev, they may also be using outsourced dev. So how do you make sure you have consistency in the deployment of your security requirements for a given application? It also gets very granular very quickly. We were talking about fintech earlier. We as end users perceive our banking login as one application. That is very much not true, right? And then you get into security, your dashboard and the menu are secured differently. Your bill pay and your wire transfers are secured differently, if for no other reason than the fact that wire transfers are actually regulated, and therefore there are actual different rules for it. But also it's a different experience, right? The bill pay you want to actually, you're probably willing to do a little less security because it's a batch. You want customers to use your bill pay, so you don't want to have as much friction in it. Wire transfers, somebody needs to do it immediately. They're willing to go through probably more friction because they need an immediate transfer for some reason. And so that's where you start to get very complex very quickly. And that's where we manage what we call the DevSecOps hairball very well. So nobody has to think about it. They just get their instructions. Here's your piece of the puzzle to solve to make this secure.
So for Wabbi, is there a vertical market that is more aligned? Like fintech obviously is always looking for top-notch security.
Correct. So fintech, obviously, fintech, and then the financial services, anybody that's been regulated and doing software development for a long time, they're just more sophisticated in this, and they've been struggling with the problem. So they have more maturity in what they're trying to solve. But again, everybody needs to be doing good application security, and application security is not just about am I doing SaaS, DaaS testing? It's about, are you following the process of how to do the secure thing, which could be a manual component. And so while we're not vertical agnostic, while we are vertical agnostic, we tend to see a lot of strength in those highly regulated industries, healthcare, financial services, but also in the industries that are using technology as a competitive advantage. Retail, media, right? The ones that as consumers, we don't think about as software companies. And for them, the efficiency is king, because that's how they're going to outpace their peers. So it's both about better delivery and keeping their operating cost on the development side from getting super high, because that's competitive advantage right there.
Very good. Do you have international customers?
We are in that stage where we've had customers with international teams, and we're starting to push our expansion internationally as well. Again, to the point like FinServe, right? Obviously, the UK is a great hub for that. So we've been very strategic and targeted about where we go into that. Time zones, this is the founding conversation. Time zones matter, how you support that. So you don't want to just do a scattershot approach.
Now, I want to move to our target audience. The people that I'm catering to in this podcast are startup owners. And the startup owners are that scrappy, and they're not always following the best practices, especially in security. Can they use Wabbi? Is there a startup version of it?
It absolutely is, right? It's about good hygiene and processes. And to your point, I think that's something that a lot of startups forget to implement early on. If you don't start with the fundamentals it's going to be hard to reverse into them. And so you can absolutely use Wabbi. You can have one process. In fact, a lot of our customers start with just one application, right? Because they even have to smooth out their processes because they've gotten so entangled. And so there's really no, if you are planning on moving fast, that makes it all the more important to have the good fundamentals of cybersecurity processes automated from day one.
So what would be the Wabbi integration for a startup? What are they getting out of Wabbi?
So I'd say the first thing is, and there are a lot of free resources, OWASP is great, etc. Come up with your base processes. That's as simple as that. Then you can program them into Wabbi. And the second thing, which Wabbi can automate for you to make sure, again, you just have good hygiene, is your testing. And there's a lot of good free testing. SonarQube is the best known open source one. We happen to integrate it. And that way you just start getting in the habit of always testing your code on a regular schedule. We're a startup. We're always our first customer, and we can automate that, right? So again, it becomes part of the habit, and this way you're not developing a big a debt backlog when you suddenly start scanning in a year. We can help you constantly prioritize those, so that way you know what you have to fix now and what can just be monitored until your risk profile and policies change later.
I like that you eat your own dog food.
Yeah, we do. I prefer the term drink our own champagne.
Champagne. Yeah, you're a wine person, right?
Yes.
So now let's move to the industry. What are the misconceptions that you are seeing?
I think this comes full circle to where we started, is that rooms with no doors and no windows are not going to make us more secure. And this is where you have to find the right balance of regulation and the ability to innovate and give people the ability to manage the risk, right? It's a little like for those that remember this era when it came out, Sarbanes-Oxley, right? Sarbox and SOC 2 and whatnot. You have to give people the ability to set their own processes and define their risk and then hold them accountable to that. But there needs to be a little bit of a framework, right? People go, oh, I'm PCI compliant. Well, they don't realize that PCI compliant just means that you followed the standards that you have preset that meet these good things, right? So I think that's where, as we think about regulators and how we move forward from a cybersecurity perspective, is that let's not lock up the child in a bubble, because that's not going to get it. That comes with its own risks, right? We saw Bubble Boy. That didn't work out well, right? And so how do you give people the flexibility? It's the same conversation with innovation and AI and whatnot, to make sure that they're managing the risk appropriately. Because one of the things that you're seeing now with all these complicated regulatory reporting requirements is that people just actually say, if you make it too complicated for me, I'm just going to wait until I do something wrong and find out what I did wrong, because that's cheaper and easier than hiring very expensive consultants to maybe get it right.
True, very true. So now I want to talk about the big elephant in the room, the generative AI. The generative AI, Gen AI is everywhere. And I think it has a significant impact on cybersecurity. How does Wabbi play there? And how do you see this generative AI impacting cybersecurity?
Right. So first, just as generative AI became common use for everybody else, the bad guys picked it up too. You saw an immediate uptick in attacks, right? Because they're going to use the same technology we are. And this is where I just go back to, we have to instill this notion of cybersecurity being good hygiene and good risk management, because we don't have that in place today. For example, we have a policy that says you are absolutely not to paste our code into any kind of generative AI and then take any kind of generative AI and put it back into our code. You are allowed to use it for experimentation or ideation or whatnot, but those two things must not happen. That's just hygiene, right? That's not a fancy tool. That is hygiene and communication and whatnot. And, and that's really, again, the world we play in. It's about the process of implementing security and what the right thing is to do. And this is why it is so important for companies to finally get themselves around DevSecOps, because if they don't get that done now, generative AI is just going to kill them, right? There is no amount, you can't come back from it. And that mountain is going to be very, very hard to climb.
Thank you. When I hear about no-code startups, the startups that are built on a series of prompts, and seriously, people are building, that. And to me, that is the most scary thing in the world, because I am very precise when I'm working with AI, and it's giving me exactly what I want after the third try. And imagine someone who is not able to define their requirements and coming up with an answer, and there's more dangerous loopholes and loss of code security issues that will be there because people have just copy pasted generated code. So yeah, it's scary to me. Cybersecurity became even more important right now. If it was
correct, exactly. And again, we've got to make that transition of, we are no longer in this on-prem world where you can have, I remember, as I'm sure you do, going to data centers, you had the armed guards, right? You had special keys to get in, you could only go so often. That's not the world of cybersecurity anymore, right? It's porous, and we have to make sure we are building for this porous world that we live in.
That's awesome. One other question I have on the industry level. Recently, Chinese researchers revealed that their quantum computers have broken RSA. Now, my read is that, okay, we probably have broken it ourselves and we didn't tell anyone, but they're publishing it. That obviously has a ripple effect on people who are like, oh my God, RSA is broken. Like whenever somebody says, I got a 22-bit D-Wave quantum computer and I'm going to break every encryption known to man.
Again, not to sound like a broken record, but again, this is where it comes to good processes, good hygiene, and mitigating controls, right? You can't lock everything up, and encryption is just one way that we secure ourselves. What happens when that encryption gets broken, right? Your 45-minute server idea, right? What happens when that encryption, is there a second line of defense? Do you care that there's a second line of defense on this particular thing? Or maybe it's just easier that you kill that and spin something new up, right? And this is where you have to think about this as a process and a strategy, not just a bunch of security systems that are creating a barrier.
So my last question on this is, what keeps Brittany Greenfield up at night?
I think that what keeps me up at night is actually the fact that, and you've heard it in all my answers, that our cybersecurity hygiene, despite it being such a large industry and the spending constantly growing on it, we are still missing a lot of fundamentals in how we're developing software, and those are creating 9 out of 10 breaches begin due to defects in code, and those are the open windows, the wrong locks, right? These are the vulnerabilities, which are just specialized security defects, right? And that are allowing easy access to these enterprises. And until we get the fundamentals right, it doesn't matter how many tools we buy.
Awesome. So we are finally at the last part of our interview, and I've never done comedy right, so I'm gonna botch this. I'm gonna go slow and then deal with it. So this is what I want to call my lightning round. It's a Jeopardy style where I give you the answer, you ask me the question. You ready?
Okay.
So this widely used CMS, content management system, is used in your website, webbysoft.com.
What is WordPress?
Awesome.
Great tool for founders, right?
Awesome. When Brittany is not running Wabbi, you might find her spending time with this adorable pug.
That is Moxie, very important member of our team here.
Awesome. After earning her MBA from a prestigious institution, Brittany worked for companies like NetSuite and Cisco.
What is MIT Sloan?
Awesome. Awesome. So thank you so much for this interview. I think it is one of the best, obviously the first, and it'll be the best ever in my book, because always the first one you never forget. So I would urge startup founders to listen to this podcast and follow you. How do people follow you?
The best way is to connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know that you heard me on Kabir's podcast, and any questions, especially for the founders out there or those looking to learn more about application security and how to integrate it in, just ping me, right? This takes a village, and I'm happy to be a resource, and hope we have the chance to talk again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, bye-bye.